A new International Association for Near-Death Studies publication asks, how can we more effectively study NDEs? I'm Chris Daly, and I'm here with Ryan Geckner.
Will the Pentagon's Office for Investigating Anomalous Phenomena be closed? And what connections have internet sleuths found between recent murders and disappearances of prominent scientists and military personnel? This is Headlines from the Beyond.
So let's talk a little bit about near-death phenomena. If you're familiar with the International Association for Near-Death Studies, if you're not, they're a professional organization specific, obviously, to near-death studies, but they put out a journal. And their most recent issue, and I want to talk about this for a second, because their most recent issue came out in March of this year, but it's labeled Volume 42, Number 3, Fall 2024. It's not a mislabel. I looked on their website. I don't understand.
Academic publishing is weird, and sometimes it takes a long time to get something out.
Sure, we'll go with that. In any case, there is one particular article in here that is really interesting, and it's written by a guy by the name of Jeff O'Driscoll. He's a medical doctor and an emergency department physician of 25 years. He was at the University of Utah School of Medicine. He was a department chair there. So he's somebody who's been doing this a while. He's good at his job, and is now retired from that part of his life. So in this article, he talks about some of his own personal experiences with near-death phenomena, as well as that of his patients. And then he goes on to call for kind of a new way to look at this and some things like that. So let's talk a little bit about his own experience, because the experience he talks about in here is fascinating. So in 1997, he had a patient by the name of Jeff Olson, who had been in a car accident during which his wife and 14-month-old son had died. So they died at the scene. Also, while at the scene, he felt that he had left his body. He could see kind of the crash, so he felt that he had left his body, and was watching the scene. And he saw his wife in what he called an inexplicable light. She tells him, go back in your body. You need to stay and raise our remaining son, because one son had passed. So O'Driscoll was the emergency doctor who was there when Olson arrived at the ED. And when Olson got there, O'Driscoll saw his, meaning Olson's wife, sort of hovering above him. Her remains, of course, were back at the site of the accident, which was just 200 miles away, but she was standing above the gurney. O'Driscoll had never met her, but he says that he knew exactly who she was. And she communicated profound gratitude for the care her husband was receiving. Now, Olson at this point was not even conscious. So fast forward a month, O'Driscoll goes to see Olson in his hospital room because he feels that he needs to tell him about this experience he had, saying, I saw your wife. Olson then tells him about the experience he had at the crash site. So that, to me, I mean, that's like,
wild.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So that's not only a person having a near-death experience where they see their body and they're told to go back, which is a really common part of NDEs, but it's also an emergency physician seeing something.
Mm-hmm.
So going through this article, and I won't kind of say everything that's in it, but the article goes through a bunch of different cases, and it goes through a bunch of different statistics of how often end-of-life experiences occur, specifically in the United States. So he talks about 3 different kinds of ELEs. First, near-death experiences. And this is, of course, an experience that a person has after they're clinically dead, so flatlining. And he divides that into 3 different types of people where it's most common. There's cardiac survivors, people who've had heart attacks, prolonged ICU patients, and suicide survivors. He then talks about shared death experiences. This is when a healthy person, it's usually a caregiver or a loved one, experiences the transition of a dying individual into the afterlife. This happens both bedside and remote, and it's actually a lot more common than you think that kind of thing happens. Once someone has one of these, they actually often have more. So that's interesting. I don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
The third type, is the deathbed visions and dreams. These are also called end of life dreams and visions, or ELDVs. These are vivid experiences reported by 50 to 80% of hospice patients. They typically involve reunions with deceased loved ones, preparation for travel, and a deep sense of peace or comfort.
Hmm.
So it's while someone is sort of close to death, they start to see things and they start to see people who they loved. And, you know, people have talked for a long time about what that is. Is it just what someone wants to see? Is it an
Hmm.
actual visitation? So there's a lot of different ways of interpreting that. Regardless, O'Driscoll goes through and estimates about how many of these occur each year based on some knowledge that we've already got. And he said there's probably right around 3 million people experiencing those three things each year in the US alone.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's a lot of people.
Hmm.
That's a lot of data.
Yes, it is.
As a researcher, that's very exciting to me to have a lot of data because you learn so much more when you have data, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So O'Driscoll kind of finalizes his article saying he would like to call for a national database of end of life experiences. I love this idea.
Hmm.
We can study things then. It goes along with a lot of the ideas that we talk about.
Hmm.
So he says this has been done with other things, and that's true. When you start to make something so that it's a mandatory reporting kind of thing. If someone has a particular disease or whatever it is, it goes into a database and there's a lot of sharing of information. And, through medical research, then we can actually start helping people better. So the more information you collect on something, the more likely it is that you're ultimately going to be able to do something for people with it.
Hmm.
But this can happen with ELEs as well. And that's not to say we can do something about them, but more to understand them. So O'Driscoll basically says there's a protocol he'd like to put into place to create this database. And it starts with every resuscitated patient will be enrolled without an additional physician's order. So if a
Hmm.
patient is resuscitated, doesn't matter if they say, I've had a near death experience, whatever it is, if a patient's resuscitated, they are automatically enrolled in this. So it becomes a mandatory report. Then the patient is interviewed, yay, qualitative data,
That's all right. Love to see it.
in a timely fashion. They can opt out of this, of course, but the idea is that you have a coordinator who can then come in and interview folks and get really solid information. So the person doing that interview, or the coordinator, asks a series of standardized questions, and this is really important, is non-judgmental.
Hmm.
Then the coordinator can arrange counseling, follow-up, so we can help people. I mean, this is a life-changing experience for
Yep.
people, regardless of whether you have an NDE or not. If you've
Hmm.
just been resuscitated, that can be life-changing for
Yeah,
you.
yeah, definitely.
So you can arrange counseling, follow-up, etc. And finally, the data becomes centralized for research. I love this idea.
Hmm.
He suggests that there's a lot of people out there who might want to fund something like this. I love that even more. Would like to volunteer
Yes.
ourselves to
Yes.
help create this.
Hmm.
But he is essentially calling for this database and for everyone to begin to use a model of consciousness that says that consciousness exists independent of the physical body and continues after death. Obviously, a lot of people do believe this,
Hmm.
but that's not the automatic assumption when we talk about consciousness and death. So he's saying we need to just start this with the idea that this is true.
Hmm.
And that means we will collect the data to understand it better. So this goes along with all the kinds of research that we want to do and the kinds of things we want to promote. So that's why I thought it'd be a great thing to talk about.
Yeah, no, that's a cool story. So last week, a bill was introduced into the U.S. House of Representatives that calls for the defunding of the All Domain Anomaly Research Office. The bill, which was introduced by Representative Tim Burchett of Tennessee, who has been heavily involved in recent conversations related to disclosure. You may recognize the name from our previous reporting on the visit of the Virginia witnesses from Brazil with members of Congress. He was there. And the bill would seek to redistribute the responsibilities of this office. So, not completely just get rid of any and all tracking of this phenomena, but spread it out across the Pentagon. eliminating centralized control over UAP investigations and information. It would also explicitly prohibit the creation of a single replacement office for AARO as well. So I think that's kind of important to Representative Burchett that this information is not held by one group. Now, if you aren't aware, AARO was established in 2022 following what was called then the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. It's currently led by Dr. John T. Kozlowski. He has a PhD in electrical engineering and previously held a position within the National Security Agency. Part of the reason that certain representatives are maybe a little upset with AARO is due in part to their annual reports. So, in their most recent annual report, and keep in mind it's an annual report, it was released in March 2024. AARO claimed that there was, quote, no empirical evidence, end quote, of alien technology. They still have not released a 2025 or 2026 report. And that is clearly stuck in the craw of a few House representatives.
Maybe they work with the International Association of Near-Death Studies.
Maybe. Maybe. So we'll be keeping an eye on this bill as it moves through the U.S. House. It was sent directly to both the House Armed Services and Intelligence Committees for their consideration.
I think this is a great idea
Mm-hmm.
to decentralize that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when knowledge is held by the few, that often means that none of the many can
Yes.
learn about it. And so I think that's a good move. I
Yeah.
have no idea if it'll work, but
Yeah. I mean, I think like many bills that get sent to committee, it will probably go there to die, but we'll keep an eye on it. And if it doesn't, we will let you know.
and I'd love to see something bipartisan happen.
Yeah, that would
That'd
be
be
cool.
great.
That would be cool. I'd go for that, you know. We also have new discussion around the disappearance of retired Air Force General William Neal McCasland as he remains missing, and some internet researchers think something much larger may be going on. So I just want to set the stage for you a little bit. Some folks online, and this has been picked up by more mainstream outlets as well, have started to put together that over the last 2.5 or so years, there's been a series of deaths and disappearances that seem to be oddly connected. So I'm just going to lay these out for you in chronological order. So we have to start by going back to July of 2023. Dr. Michael David Hicks passes away. Now, some reports say his cause of death is unknown. Other reporting suggests that he had some health complications. So there is a little bit of question about how well his death fits into this broader conspiracy that's being discussed. But why we're talking about him is he worked on the DART project, which is, if you're not familiar, a project to see if we can deflect asteroids that are coming to Earth. He also worked on the Near Earth Asteroid Tracking Project. You'll remember we talked a little bit about them in our 3I Atlas discussion. He was involved in the Dawn mission and also the NASA Deep Space One mission. So this guy is very connected with things that are going on at NASA. Now, there was no foul play suspected in his death, but he does have some connections to others that I'm about to list for his work in NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab. That kind of is at the center of this discussion. Next, we fast forward a whole year to July of 2024. Dr. Frank Mywald passes away. Again, cause of death unknown, no autopsy performed. There's no publicly available data about that. But he was the lead researcher of a project that could help future space missions detect clear signs of life on other worlds. So clearly something we'd be of interest on here. Next, we fast forward to May of 25, and this is where things start to get really close together. Anthony Chavez, he worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory until he retired in 2017, disappears. He has not been found. All of these people that disappeared that I'm about to list have not been found. So do with that what you will. Just a month later, in June of 2025, Monica Reza disappears while hiking with her friends. She was the director of the materials processing group at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, and where we first get our first clear connection to General McCasland. She received funding between 2011 and 13 from the Air Force Research Lab while McCasland was the commander there. He directly oversaw that grant. Next, just 4 days later, Melissa Casillas, who was an administrative assistant at Los Alamos with a top-level security clearance, disappears. So over the course of less than a month and a half, we have 3 disappearances, 2 from Los Alamos. A couple months later, in August of 2025, Steven Garcia disappears. He's seen leaving his Albuquerque home on foot while carrying a handgun. That may sound familiar to you, for those of you that know about the McCaslin story. He was a government contractor. He was what was called a property custodian with a top security clearance for the Kansas City National Security Campus in Albuquerque. Why it's named Kansas City and it's in Albuquerque, I couldn't tell you. But Google is your friend there. Now, what should we know about this site? It is, as this is described on their own website, it is one of 8 sites that comprise the National Nuclear Security Administration. Their primary focus is manufacturing 80% of non-nuclear components that go into the nuclear stockpile. Steven Garcia was in charge of he had oversight over all of those materials. Now, an anonymous source disputes the claims that he was a danger to himself, saying that he was a, quote, very stable person. In that December, so in December of 2025, Dr. Nuno Loureiro was a plasma physicist at MIT and was assassinated in his home in Brookline. Interestingly enough, this shooter also committed the shooting at Brown that happened 2 days earlier, so you may remember hearing about some of that. Earlier this year, in February, Dr. Carl Grillmer, a Caltech researcher who worked on research heavily supported by the Jet Propulsion Lab, was also assassinated. Then, just 11 days later, General McCaslin also disappears. Now, it's important to recognize that Kirtland Air Force Base, where McCaslin was for a while, Los Alamos, and this Kansas City Nuclear Security Campus all work very closely on national security projects. So the connections here, I think, open up some questions about maybe how small this group of people that are working on these types of projects is. And what I mean by saying that is, maybe perhaps if we looked at the last 10 people that disappeared and died that have connections to these labs, you could probably draw interesting, weird connections between all of them. But there is reporting from someone who oversees work at the Kansas City National Security Campus that says that they do sometimes get targeted by foreign adversaries and things like that. So there's some open questions about what's going on here.
I'd like to know more about how these individuals may have been connected as opposed to the organizations they work
right,
for.
Exactly.
Because that would say a lot more about what's actually going on.
Yes.
It is interesting, though. I mean, to me, the deaths are less interesting than the disappearances.
Because no one's been found. That I find.
No one's been found. No bodies have been found.
Yes.
And, some of the deaths, I mean, I don't know the age of a lot of these folks.
Some of them are older.
But when you say someone who's been retired for quite a few years, the chances of it being a natural death are higher. And so that sort of thing might be getting lumped into this in ways that maybe it shouldn't.
Well, in ways that maybe it is actually making it less clear what's actually going on.
Right, because the disappearances are really interesting when you don't then find bodies.
And the clustering around those disappearances to me is really curious.
Yeah. And that makes the timeline a little bit shorter. I mean, the early ones from 23, 24, those were deaths that maybe could just be explained as they were deaths.
Yeah, I mean, 2 disappearances from Los Alamos within a month and a half seems weird.
It's interesting. I don't know what to make of it.
Yeah, so we'll keep an eye on that one too. Thank you all for listening as we continue to follow the stories of the strange and the uncanny. This has been Headlines from the Beyond.